The end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risks all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 39 of F1 in Review, the episode and the hour where we discuss the season finale, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and we look forward to what might be in store for the 2023 season. I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review account, where these episodes are posted once they've gone out, be that on your podcast provider, or be that live on River Radio, or via the listen back feature as well. And we dive into the first topic, ironically, about P2 in the Drivers' Championship. We all knew that P1 for the constructors, and indeed the drivers, was done and dusted many races ago, but the fight for P2 in the drivers was a very much live issue before this Grand Prix finished. The once leader of this entire division, Charles Leclerc, was level on points with Red Bull's Sergio Perez, and while Perez qualified in P2, it was Leclerc who would finish there on Sunday, get the points and ultimately secure that position. Now, Ferrari went for a one-stop strategy for those who forgot or didn't watch this Grand Prix, while Red Bull pitted twice. Did that decision cost Sergio Perez? What's our thoughts on the fact that, essentially, there was such a great chance for Red Bull to secure a 1-2 and a 1-2-3, if you will, with Sergio Perez getting second, but they failed to do so. Our thoughts on this?
They did fail to do so, and it was odd for Abu Dhabi, the final race of the year, to present to us 2 years on the trot now, quite an interesting race. Last year was very exciting, and for our thoughts on that, go listen to that particular podcast. But this time it was different. Max had already secured the championship, and this time it was duel in the desert for second place. And to be honest, I thought what was really, really interesting about this particular Grand Prix was Perez and Leclerc seemed relatively equally matched, rightly or wrongly, because I would argue that it was absurd for Perez to be challenging for P2, because Ferrari should have been challenging for P1, and therefore Leclerc should have automatically got second. But hey, there we were, them joint on points going into the final race, and on paper the two-stop strategy was going to be faster, and in fairness to Red Bull, I think it actually was. I will say, maybe slightly controversially, that if it was Max, he would have caught Leclerc within the pits. So I think theoretically, definitely, it was faster for Red Bull to pit Perez and put him on a new set of tyres. Unfortunately, due to low degradation and just Ferrari's overall pace and almost ability to match that pace of Perez at times, and Leclerc was putting in some stellar lap times. Leclerc's strategy of pitting at lap 21 from the medium onto the hard tyres managed to get him over the line 1.5 seconds ahead of Sergio Perez. And Perez was putting in fastest laps. He was doing his best. He was actually utilising the traffic really nicely, because he was getting DRS from overtaking the traffic, which was, allowing him to get closer. But unfortunately, I just don't think he quite had it in him to challenge for Leclerc. And that makes sense to me, because Leclerc was challenging at the beginning of the season for Verstappen's title, really. Let's face it. And so I think Leclerc is a slightly faster driver than Perez. So it turns out, I think, that Perez's advantage on new fresh tyre, because he stopped on lap 15 from the mediums to the hards, and then on Then he did 18 laps on those hards, and then did 25 laps on another set of hards. So the new tyre advantage turns out was pretty similar to Leclerc's advantage on pace. So it was one of those things where I think Ferrari just managed to somehow strategize themselves a victory for Leclerc. They cracked out both the Magic Ouija board and the Magic 8 Ball, shook the Magic 8 Ball, and all signs said to no for pitting Leclerc again, and it worked. It just worked. Brilliant. But I can't help feeling a little bit sorry for Perez. I feel like this was his opportunity, shall we say, for P2. Maybe his one opportunity, because it's not often that the challengers, and the challengers for first place, the alternative P1 ends up slipping back to P3. It doesn't happen very often. You wouldn't, for example, expect Hamilton to be challenging Verstappen for first place and then suddenly go down to P3. Or Max Verstappen to be challenging someone for P1 and then go down to P3. So, could a Red Bull have helped him throughout the season? I don't think so. I think the opportunities to help him was in the last race in Brazil, and as it turns out, those points wouldn't have been enough either. So the only way I think perhaps Perez could have won is if they'd got Verstappen to drop back, hold Leclerc up by 1.5-2 seconds, a bit like how Perez held Hamilton up last year. But to be honest, they're not going to compromise Max for the race win, and it was just a bit of a shame, really. But hey, I think Perez gave it his absolute best. Third place is it's not anything to be too ashamed about. It's pretty good in Formula One, and if we all are very honest, I'd say Leclerc was the most deserving of P2, I think, overall pace and potential.
A fascinating battle that went down to the wire, and that was about it, really. I think it speaks volumes to the championship when this is the key battle for the championship, because in reality, no one really cares about who finishes second in the championship. It's nice, but it's not exactly Hollywood stuff, is it? But at the same time, a fair play to Charles Leclerc, who actually did, I thought, a very good performance, because Ferrari looked okay in qualifying, but Red Bull looked like maybe a step ahead this weekend. And for him to do a good strategy in the race, or Ferrari to do a good strategy in the race, first of all, wow. Second of all, fair play to them for pulling it off. It meant that, in the end, Leclerc's bagged that second place in the championship. Scant consolation, especially when you think that he was 46 points ahead of Verstappen with 3 races in. And then at the end, he finishes 146 behind. For those of you who aren't so sure of the maths, that's a 192-point swing across 19 races. 10 points a race, you could say. Not great. But at the same time, it is Leclerc's highest ever championship finish. Perez's highest ever championship finish as well, I do believe, because he came third last year ahead of, or did he? He came third or fourth last year in the battle with Bottas, so it could well be, probably is, Perez's highest championship finish as well. At the same time, though, will they really be too bothered about that? I don't think they will. Ferrari would have expected a lot more from this season, having had that blinding start, having had little pockets as well where they looked like they were on the ball and were ready to challenge, like around Silverstone, Austria, France, where they Leclerc arguably should have won all 3 of those races, but he just won one, got strategized in another, and retired from another. So it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say this when they finished 205 points behind Red Bull and the constructors, but they lost momentum this season, and it was partially an opportunity missed. Unlike the opportunity which Leclerc had in this race to get second, and he pulled it off, you had the little battle at the end where Perez was closing in on the different strategy with the faster tyres, but he couldn't quite reel him in at the end. And that part which lit up arguably not the most exciting race in the world. Shock. But yeah, Leclerc getting that second, a bit of satisfaction. And I'm sure he will be hoping for a much better performance next year and for Ferrari to be much more in contention again. Obviously, time will tell. Will Mercedes come back? That's the big elephant in the room, arguably. But yeah, he sort of he got what he wanted. I guess if he wanted second place, he'll tell you that he wouldn't have wanted second place, and he would have wanted just the championship, which is fair enough. But I think even though he may want that little second place, just a little, he probably gets a financial bonus. That's probably the main incentive for him to get it. But yeah, generally it'll be scant consolation after the way which Verstappen romped to the title, realistically. But fair play to Ferrari for pulling off the strategy well in the final race. If only they could have done that more often on a more regular basis this season.
Indeed, credit to Ferrari. They had a fight in their hands in terms of this final race. They won it fair and square, really, but as you say, then again, should Leclerc have been in this fight? Should he have been fighting with Verstappen's teammate versus Verstappen himself? I don't think so. If you look at the very start of this season, look at the calibre of equipment he had and how ultimately he's been the victim of bad luck, be that by some reliability issues, the power units failing on multiple occasions. I think back to Barcelona for an example of that one. And the strategy going horribly wrong owing to Ferrari's self-inflicted wounds, you may say, being brought upon Charles Leclerc. So, credit to them. We're often very eager to go and bash Ferrari when they do things badly, but they've done this correctly, they've done this well, credit to them, but it's all relative praise, really, because they once again underperformed in a more recent season of F1. So, yeah, lots more to do, really, and they can see why there's question marks over Binotto's future moving forwards, and in terms of what Ferrari do, where they go, who they recruit, and all that sort of stuff as well. And looking at Red Bull, now, if you consider that Verstappen is annoyed, shall we say, about the Monaco incident, be that Perez supposedly stopping his car and red flagging qualifying so he could get himself on P1 and stop his teammate from doing so. Imagine what this whole situation with Sergio Perez having seemingly beat P2 in the Drivers' Championship, somewhat gift-wrapped, you may say, going into the final quartile of the season, and then having it snatched away owing to somewhat, you may say, his teammate and his team, because if you consider if Max had played ball in Brazil, put the team first versus himself, that could have been ultimately many if, whats, buts and maybes, but 4 extra points for Perez. That would have made the fights in terms of this Grand Prix so much easier for him, coupled with the fact that, of course, he qualified in P2, so obviously Perez has to go and take some responsibility for that as well. But the fact that when you look last season, granted this was for a championship deciding Grand Prix, and indeed for points that would decide who won this, but when Perez was asked to go and back up Lewis Hamilton, he did that valiantly, was called a great teammate, a legend and all the rest. But when the boot was on the other foot and when it was about getting Perez his highest ever finish in the Drivers' Championship, Verstappen helped by saying, go full send, which is essentially saying, just try a bit harder, will you, fella? You can get him if you really just put your mind to it, which I think is annoying if I was Perez. It's demeaning. It's frankly not right, really, because I'm not too confident that Leclerc would have beaten Verstappen on pace. I'm not too sure of the argument that Verstappen couldn't have played the team game and couldn't have gone a bit closer to Leclerc because Leclerc was on fire, because let's be fair, he was only pitting once. His tyres weren't that fresh. He wasn't a raging man who was going to go and overtake him. He was strategising for P2 and no more than that. So if I was Perez, I'd be thinking, well, Verstappen could have done a bit more. Red Bull could have done a bit more. It's no deal breaker, if you will. It's no huge existential problem, but my team did let me down there slightly. So it remains to be seen if there is a hangover as such, if there may be trouble ahead for Red Bull, but things haven't ended so harmoniously and there could be a negative legacy from this. And when you consider that Ferrari will be in that title fight again in some form, I believe, and we're already seeing that Mercedes are very much up to speed in one aspect or another, this could be quite consequential. But maybe that's me with my doomsday hat on.
Well, I don't know. I assessed the radio message that you're referring to when Max does say, tell Checo's to go full send, the tyres will be alright, as him sort of trying to urge him on a little bit, not in a demeaning way, but just reassuring the team that if he is setting very good times on a pair of tyres that he had on since lap 20, then Perez could certainly go as fast as he wants on a pair of new tyres, new hard tyres that he put on lap 32 or 33, one of them, 33. So I think he was just, Max was maybe trying to make up a little bit, or at least trying to support Perez. And to be honest, Max couldn't really do anything. He actually was towing Perez away from Leclerc. If you remember at the beginning of the race, Perez stuck behind Max for quite a while and ended up getting a couple of DRSs and being towed away from Max. To be honest, I'm surprised they didn't strategize that a little bit further within the team. Max had nothing to lose and knew that he could get away from Perez really whenever he wants. Look, I'm sorry, but that's just true. I'm surprised that they didn't say, well, tell you what, why don't we get you behind Max a little bit longer? We know it's going to damage your tyres because you'll be running in the dirty air behind Max, and that does increase your degradation, but we're going to stop you twice anyway. So we might as well get you on max pace for literally max pace for a bit and then pit you. So I thought it was a bit odd that I think Red Bull kind of went a little bit half and half. Didn't quite get Perez to go fast and full enough in the race, and so dumped him on a pair of hard tyres halfway through, and unfortunately that compromised his race inevitably, because he ended up being in P3 rather than P2. So I can't help but wonder whether or not, if they had stuck behind Max a little bit longer, if Max had been told maybe from the team, so term for a few more laps, couple more laps. He could have made up another 2 seconds, and that would have actually meant he had caught Leclerc. So I do feel like it wasn't really Max necessarily being the one that demeaned Perez or didn't quite be full excellent teammate. I think to some extent Red Bull failed Perez a little bit as well. They didn't quite support him in the way that we should. And that also follows suit with the statement that Red Bull put out about the incident in Brazil, when they basically said, "Oh yeah, we told Max too late that he should let Perez by, which is why he couldn't." Which we know is a lie, because we have the recording, we have the radio messages. Red Bull, we know when this stuff happens. So again, I think you two actually predicted that Red Bull would come down on Team Max inevitably, and it seemed that's exactly what happened again. I think Red Bull kind of realised, oh no, we've got to support Perez a bit more, because P2 actually means something, and we want that little bonus. But maybe that's something that Red Bull need to learn, actually. And it's something that I think Mercedes do a bit better, perhaps. Or maybe that's just because Bottas was a better, number 2. He could actually get P2 as well. But it would be nice, I think, if Red Bull look at this moment and realise that the defeat on P2, and it was a defeat, was also because they didn't quite commit to having Perez do as well as Max.
Now, at the end of every season, we always say goodbye to a driver or two. Some go voluntarily, others are forced to go, while others take a short time out and unexpectedly come back a few years later. And I think our 4 departing drivers of Ricciardo, Vettel, Latifi, and more recently Mick Schumacher all fall into those 3 categories or so there. Now, looking at Ricciardo, he had probably the biggest bang, the final finish, the greatest end to his Formula 1 career, if he's not to return in terms of this race at the very least. He qualified P13, rose up to P9, closely followed quite literally by Vettel. He was qualifying in P9, then up to P10, and then Schumacher P12 to 16, Latifi P20 to P19. So our thoughts on these drivers' last hurrah. For some, definitely. For others, maybe.
Yeah, so we say farewell. I feel like we're saying farewell to a large amount of drivers this year, because there's actually quite a few changes in the teams and the driver market for next year. The first one doesn't really need an introduction. We've spoken about him a lot on this podcast, especially earlier on in the year in terms of his leaving. Sebastian Vettel, some would say F1 royalty, some would say F1 icon. The statistics he has are quite incredible. We've been over them before. We'll do them once more. 299 races, 4 World Championships, 53 wins, 57 poles, 38 fastest laps, 122 podiums. Quite astonishing, really. He bowed out with a race where he had strategy go against him. Aston Martin, for some reason, didn't want to give him a nice farewell, and they thought they'd come up with a concoction of a poor strategy for him, so just to make his life a little bit tougher. But he managed to come back, and thanks to the benefit of Hamilton's late retirement from the race, Vettel nabbed a point just on his farewell. I think it's safe to say he's one where some people were joking in the paddock on the weekend about how he may be back, like how Alonso was back a couple of years after his sabbatical or departure from the sport. I don't think Vettel will be back. I think he seems very he's a bit sad that he was leaving. He said he felt a bit empty on departure, but I think he seems comfortable with his decision. And also the fact that he's past his peak. He's given so much to the sport, both on and off the track. You heard so many lovely stories of interactions that people have had with him over the years, such as Charles Leclerc doing work in the simulator as a Formula 2 driver for Ferrari, and he got a handwritten letter from Vettel to say thank you for all the support. Or the other example that I read about was Vettel offering great support to Daniel Ricciardo as a friend, and also Vettel waiting in the paddock for Max Verstappen to come back from hospital after the crash at Silverstone last year. Just lovely gestures which sum up the man really, and he's had such a farewell. This became like the Sebastian Vettel Grand Prix farewell this weekend, so it almost wouldn't seem right for him to return because he's had that goodbye now. But yeah, phenomenal career. It seems like a down-to-earth, humble, incredible person, especially one that he's grown into over the years. And yeah, safe to say, I don't think he'll be back, but not because he's not good enough, but because of sort of it's his decision. It's in his own hands, and yeah, a true giant of the sport that is now departed.
Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit old now because Vettel was one of the drivers that I watched, growing up, and disliked passionately because he kept winning, and that annoyed me. And once Hamilton and Alonso go, that's it. That's my childhood drivers gone from the sport. I've watched them all tumble and leave the sport one by one, and it's bizarre now going back and watching old races because they feel a bit more like home in a weird way, comforting. Like, oh yeah, I remember this driver. Jenson Button, that chap. And it's weird watching yet another one depart from the sport. And to be honest, we knew Vettel was going to be going because he started doing other things. He was on our UK TV talking about politics and environmental challenges. Called himself a hypocrite, turning up to races and becoming much more of almost like a protest driver. I'd say doing very well, but also bringing some critical issues to the sport that were close to his heart. And he says that there's still a race to win, and there absolutely is still, and that's what he's going to be concentrating on now. And I think that's brilliant. I can see Hamilton doing a very, very similar thing. They're both drivers have this incredible storyline arc, if you'd like, and Vettel is very much passionate about something else now, and it was very odd to see him doing his final donuts, and sort of exiting out the smoke. As you said, Angus, they definitely put him on a weird strategy at Aston Martin. They had him on the same pair of medium tyres, a lap 25, which means he got overtaken by everyone, undoing his incredible work in qualifying. His qualifying pace was absolutely fantastic, and an absolute masterclass of the old Vettel, I think, which was really great to see. Actually, it's amazing when you think, oh wow, they're a bit slow and rubbish now, and then suddenly, boom, they demonstrate their talent, and you think, wow, what could have been? Anyway, so yeah, they pit him on lap 25 from the mediums, got overtaken by everyone before that, and then stuck him on a pair of hards, and he couldn't really get anywhere after that because everyone else was on a pair of hards. And so yeah, pretty terrible strategy, but at least he actually ended the race, unlike Kimi Räikkönen last year, who sort of just retired. And also Alonso this year failed for Abu Dhabi, and so did Hamilton, which was a bit weird. But Vettel we're going to be saying goodbye to him, but I hope we see him around the paddock a little bit more. I think it'd be really good to see his presence doing interviews or whatever. So I think although this is the last we'll see him flying around the track, perhaps at 180, 190 miles an hour, I think we'll see him inputting into the sport in a very different way, and or at least I hope we do.
The end of an era, but I think it was probably the right time to go for Seb Vettel. He's 35 years old, not really going anywhere in that Aston Martin car, and bowing out in style, really. If you look at the last quartile of the season, more points finishes than not. And I completely forgot as well, on a slight caveat, that he missed the first 2 races owing to COVID. Didn't race in Bahrain, didn't race in Saudi Arabia, didn't even finish in the 3rd Grand Prix either. And there he is, equal on points with Daniel Ricciardo. He raced all those races. Okay, I'll stop. But anyway, it was nice for him to get some points finish in his final Grand Prix. I do agree there, Tristan. I think he will be turning up with Sky, with F1 TV, with the respective German outlet for Formula 1, and giving us his 2 pence of thought into various different things. And let's not forget, he's a very strong voice. He's not just one of these drivers like, dare I say, someone like Nico Rosberg, who won one world championship, then retired, and then pops up now and again to have pot shots or say something else, or something regarding a different element of F1 or the regulations surrounding it. He's a powerful voice, and he's been growing that voice, nurturing it on a whole array of issues, and I think that's going to be carrying on outside of Formula 1, but also inside as well. When Vettel says something, I imagine everyone sits up and listens, as they did previously, and will continue to do so moving forward. So it's sad to see him go. I would have liked to see him be replaced with a younger talent than someone like Alonso. He even cited his retirement as being, the reason he did it was why he wanted someone of a younger age to go and take his seat, essentially, which unfortunately hasn't happened. But then again, you can't exactly decide that if you're a driver versus someone higher up in Aston Martin. But sad to see him go, but I'm glad he's decided to go now and not carried on for too long like someone like Kimi Räikkönen did, and like someone along the lines of Fernando Alonso, I fear will do, because I don't think he's a driver who knows when enough is enough. If he's going to carry on and on and on, and eventually we're going to go, just leave the damn sport, man, which he eventually will do. But hopefully he'll take a leaf from Seb Vettel's book and go, actually, I've had enough time for someone else, but we'll see on that regard. And talking about the man who's equal on points to Seb Vettel in the Drivers' Championship, Daniel Ricciardo. Now, we knew similarly to Vettel he would be leaving the sport earlier on than, let's say, Mick Schumacher or indeed Latifi as well. It's understood he's now going to be the reserve driver for Red Bull, so a weird circular nature of his career taking place there. Let's not forget that many seasons prior he left Red Bull, then went to Renault and ended up driving for McLaren, and things never really worked out for him, as we've documented well on this podcast, episodes prior, series prior, going back to even when this was first created in the very basement of the University of Southampton. We questioned his decisions in terms of where he went and the rest, and unfortunately it's gone exactly how we feared it would in many regards, and it's a shame to see, but nice to see that he's able to carry on in Formula 1 in some degree or fashion. Never say never in terms of a comeback, I think it was a shame that he wasn't pinched by someone like Haas or Williams. I think it would have been quite an asset there, but that may still happen. But the age of 33, as we're seeing with someone like Nico Hülkenberg, who can come back in older years and indeed race to when you're 40 odd in terms of what Alonso's doing, and Raikkonen as well. But very nice as well for him to go and get a points finish in his final race of this season. Credit to him. After a poor start he has in the last quartile or so, shown his worth and did help McLaren in their battle to, well, unsuccessful battle granted, but battle nonetheless to get and beat Alpine in this season. But shame to see how it's gone, but I do have a feeling Ricciardo will be back in some form.
You think so?
I do.
I'm not sure. Weird of you to bring up the how many years ago we've started this podcast. It feels like only yesterday, but you're right. We set off down this particular podcast road, humbly talking, innocently talking, I think, about Ricciardo's future and how he was going to make great strides of success at one team or another, bouncing his way from Red Bull over to Renault and then over to McLaren. Each time we hoped he'd do a little bit better than before, but alas, his space hopper seems to have got a puncture in it, and as much as we thought he was world-class material, perhaps winning the world championship or challenging at the very least, and I would say once upon a time he was, he just has been nowhere for a very long time. I think his mistake actually has been all the moves. Do I think he should have stayed at Renault? Yeah, I think he probably should have. Built with the team something he could drive, instead went to McLaren where he couldn't really drive the car. And it's not his fault necessarily, it just didn't suit him. But we know he was improving at Renault. In fact, let's not forget that he got Renault's first podium, and then the then team principal, Cyril Abiteboul, ended up having to try and get a tattoo as a result because he had a bet. That was the fun, excited Ricciardo that was going on to build a team into something better. And I think it was very unusual for him to then ditch it for McLaren, because McLaren clearly was the wrong move. But it's a real shame that he's fallen from such a high place. And the rumours are next year he's going to be a reserve driver at Red Bull. I think that probably suits him. We know that he still has a good relationship with Red Bull, and Red Bull are very fond of him. So I have a feeling that he'll be back. But it's going to be weird if you're like an unusual circle of Formula One life, because let's not forget he ditched Red Bull because he thought they were becoming Team Max, and he's going to be straight back at Red Bull after all this time, with Red Bull being very much Team Max. So maybe that says a lot about the sport. But I think the rumours are also that Ricciardo could have taken a seat with a lower team. And perhaps, that wouldn't have been a bad choice, but it looks like Ricciardo is one of these drivers that's, thinking, look, mid or top team or nothing for me. So he's going to be probably a reserve driver, and maybe he'll get one or two races if he's lucky, like Nico Hülkenberg managed to get before securing his own seat for next year. But to be honest, it's just a bit of a shame to watch him this season. This season's gone by so quickly, and I think we haven't really commented on how Ricciardo's just lost all the bounce. The bounce is but gone from his bungee.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate in terms of whether he'll be back, because he's still of the opinion that, I am Daniel Ricciardo, I'm going to have a year out, and then I want a top team drive when I come back. But to be honest, by the time he's looking for that drive next year, he'll be 34 years old. He's had a poor 2 years where he's not been at his best at all. He's been put in the shade, really, by Lando Norris over the course of time. Really has been put in the shade. He only scored 29% of McLaren's points this year, which is a really stark figure for a man who has 8 Grand Prix wins in his time in Formula One. I don't know about the move to Red Bull as a reserve driver. I feel like it's probably a comfort move for him, in that it takes him back to somewhere he knows well, people he knows well. It means that he can still develop and be around the paddock as well. At the same time, I can see why he wouldn't go back to Haas. I get that. Or somewhere like Williams, which were rumoured to be potential options, because he may see that as a waste of time. But then also, I think it's racing at the end of the day. It's Formula One racing. It would still be the thick of the action, the heat of the battle, etc., etc. So it's an interesting move to go to Red Bull. I'm not convinced it'll reap rewards, because I think they're clearly committed to Verstappen and Perez, despite what we say about over the last few weeks and the drama that's gone on. They seem to have moved on at least a bit now, coming into the weekend, and it all seems to be better between the teammates. If something were to go wrong, they'd arguably be quicker to promote Nick de Vries or Yuki Tsunoda than swoop in for a 34-year-old Daniel Ricciardo. So, yeah, and his view is that he will be... Not that he's coming across as saying, oh, I will get a top team drive in 2024 because I am Daniel Ricciardo. But he's almost like... is coming across that way, as if he will definitely get something, even though it's far from guaranteed, realistically. It'll be interesting to see how it does prevail, but yeah, I think, will he be back? I don't know. Some other drivers I may have been like, yeah, they'll be back because they're too good to be gone forever. But could we have seen Daniel Ricciardo's last ever race on Sunday? It's a distinct possibility, I think.
Quite possibly.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Between the last episode of F1 in Review and this, we found out the news that Mick Schumacher would not be racing for Haas next year. This turned out to be his final race in F1, in the short term at the very least. As I say, qualified in P12 and finished in P16. And I think really that entire race, the fall really from P12 to 16, kind of does summarise his season so far. There's been moments where I thought Mick is going to kick on here, get some solid points under his belt. This is what we needed. This is what he needed to really match Kevin Magnussen and to really take the fight to the teams above him. But that's not really happened at all this season when you look at his record anyway. I mean, a points finish twice, 8th in the British Grand Prix, 6th in Austria. But aside from that, there's been if chances, close chances, half chances, but not too many chances where Mick Schumacher's really shown us why he deserves to stay in Formula 1 in the longer term. That being said, do I think it was right for Haas to go and dump him and replace him with Nico Hülkenberg? No, I do not, because when you consider that Mick Schumacher is 23 years old and you're replacing him with a 35-year-old, what is the strategy? What is the long-term aim? There isn't really one. It's just short-termism. It's making a decision because everyone else is. It's panic buying almost and going, well, this person, Nico Hülkenberg, who last raced in 2019 in terms of a full season, he'll do a job for us because Mick isn't. And it's quite disappointing really to see once again we're seeing another Formula 1 constructor disregard the prospects of youth, not really having too much patience really, I'd say as well, in terms of letting them bed in properly, giving them time, and the resting, just going for the tried and tested safe and comfortable option. As I say, Mick Schumacher hasn't blown the doors off in any aspect of Formula 1 at all, but when you consider the potential that he has, looking back at F2 for example, when you consider that as well he's beaten Yuki Tsunoda, who is in a better car than him this season, I think it's fair to say, and has been in Formula 1 for at least the same period of time, I think it's a harsh decision really, and I think that Mick Schumacher deserves a bit more time because yes, there's arguments to go and say, oh, you know, he's a Schumacher, that's the only reason he's in Formula 1, or yes, he brings in money, that's the only reason that he's in Haas, that's the only reason he is the main driver there, or at least one who holds a permanent seat. But I don't think that's fair really, and I do think that regardless of the fact that he's likely now to be the reserve driver for Mercedes, replacing Nick de Vries and the rest, I failed to see him having a long and fulfilled Formula 1 career. He may perhaps get himself into a situation where he does what Nick de Vries does and has a reserve role for a number of years, then comes in his sort of closing stages of the 20s. But is that really what Mick Schumacher wants? I doubt it. Is that really what his pedigree and his talent has shown in F2 and indeed in patches in Formula 1? I don't think so really. So it's sad to see him go. If you're looking at it in isolation this season and the season before, you can say, oh, well, there's a reason to do so. It's a results-based business and the rest. But 23 years old, decent talent there. I think Haas will rue this decision, and they made a mistake, really.
Completely agree. Total mistake to get rid of Schumacher. And, you know, I think that the way that Haas perhaps treat their drivers is something they need to reflect upon. Maybe they're just short with them. And I can't be the only one who thinks this, and I know I'm not, because I listened to Toto Wolff's opinion on the matter, and he actually criticised Gunter. Well, sort of criticised him. He criticised him in a very Austrian way, in the way that Toto does criticise someone, and says that, you know, Gunter acts like Gunter, goes up into the mountains and where the air is thin, and that comes down and makes the decisions, and thin air makes it hard to make the good decisions. And, you know, I think that's Toto basically saying that he also thinks that they were a bit harsh on Mick. I mean, I think Mick's done a good job. And yeah, he was slow at the beginning. He was. But he's got better. And I don't understand why they're not picking up this momentum. Because he's so young as well. And having been in a very different type of car last year, which was, let's face it, slow, hard to drive, and built around a completely different set of aerodynamic rules. He's had to forget all of that and then learn this new car, and has picked up 12 points. I think Mick could have got pole positions in the last 3 or 4 races, and they still would have dumped him because they just don't want him anymore, and that's a real shame because it's just I just think it's pretty offensive to the driver program to bring someone in thinking that you're going to help them, have a massive change of regulations, and then be like, well, you didn't do great, bye. It's not like he got 0 points. He got 12 points. He's, as you say, beating Yuki Tsunoda, even though they got the same amount of points. Mick got more, beat him in the standings, and Yuki is in an AlphaTauri, and I completely agree. Better car. So I think Mick should be pretty proud of coming in 16th. I mean, blimey, Haas would have dreamed of 16th place for one of their drivers last year. And he has a better shelf life as well than Hülkenberg. And yeah, Hülkenberg is a good driver. I'm not going to suggest he's not for one moment. But you've got to think about the longevity. Hülkenberg is also a driver that holds the prestigious award for like the most races without a podium. Because he kept failing to complete a race in the podium positions, either from crashing out or just ending up dropping back. And it's worked brilliantly from Haas's perspective for Kevin Magnussen. But Kevin and Mick were working together in a good team. They stayed out each other's way. I just don't think there's anything more Mick could have done. It was a learning process for him. Maybe they wanted Michael Schumacher Sr. I'm not sure. But I don't think this is going to be the last we'll see of Mick. It can't be, right? It can't be.
Agreed.
I think someone's going to snap Mick up. He's going to get into a very nice team somewhere. And I want him to demonstrate how much of a mistake Gunter and co have made from booting him out. And they didn't even let him do donuts. I don't know if you saw that. He started doing donuts and they were like, Mick, we can't do donuts, mate. We just can't do them. He did them anyway. Who cares? What are they going to do? Fire him? I was like, go on, Mick, do another one. Just do another one, you might as well. Who cares? Absolutely, who cares? And he was like, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. Then he stopped doing it very nicely. But he did do his donuts, that's all that matters. Poor Mick. I feel like it's a bit like the Stoffel Van Dorn problem. F1 was very cruel to Stoffel. It's been a bit cruel to Mick too. Hasn't respected, perhaps, the Schumacher name in the way that we thought maybe they should have.
The Stoffel Van Dorn problem, the dilemma that cuts people up every day, and tosses and turns them in their sleep. So Mick, yes, let's talk about Mick. I'm torn on this one because I don't think he necessarily did enough to justify his place in F1. You look at his results across the year, and it tells a very strange story. He had first 9 races, 0 points. Silverstone, Austria, 12 points in 2 races, and you're like, right, now we're cooking on gas. He's finally starting to make an impact. And then the last 11 races, 0 points. He's just disappeared off the map again. Realistically, the whole season, just Magnussen's been a cut above. And yes, I know Magnussen has that experience, and he has that affinity as well with the Haas team. And obviously the headline stealer for the Haas this season will be Magnussen's pole position in Sao Paulo. But Magnussen in general had the rule of the rod over Mick Schumacher. He just had control over him and just managed to turn the screw and get those performances in. Whilst Mick, I don't know, he's not underwhelming, but I just expected better. I just thought, this would be the year he'd kick on. In a better car as well. The Haas car, especially at the start of the year, the Haas car was rapid at the start of the year, tailed off a bit, but it was more of a points contender this year. It couldn't get less of a points contender than last year, admittedly. But at the same time, they seem to be on the up a bit more, and it just didn't happen. But at the same time, Nico Hülkenberg to replace him, uninspiring as far as I'm concerned. A man who, for sure, has lots of talent, and he's displayed it a lot in his career. He's also displayed an inability to get on the podium quite a few times in his 181 starts. And I think that it's just, there were better choices out there. They could have taken a punt on another young driver, arguably. They say that they needed to have a more experienced driver to be, help them to be with a shot of helping them move up the grid. I get that because realistically they had that high of 5th in 2018, I think it was, but since then they finished, or in every other year they finished 7th or 8th or below. So I get that they have to try and move up the grid, but going to a 35-year-old driver who has been out of the sport for has only done 4 years in 4 races in 3 years as a COVID substitute. Is that the right idea? I'm not sure personally. Sad to see Mick go. And the one thing I guess he has got on his side is that he's 23 years old, will be 24 starting next year. So clearly his race is not run, if you'll pardon the pun, in terms of his F1 career, because he's young enough to be given another shot at some point. But this is definitely a step back in his career. But at the same time, if he managed to bag a reserve role with Mercedes, as is rumoured, that would be quite the coup. Yeah. And maybe that could kickstart and relaunch his potential viability to be an F1 driver again. But I'm torn because I don't think he set the world alight, but also, do I think Nico Hülkenberg will set the world alight? I'm not so sure. But Mick's last race, and compared to Vettel and Ricciardo, I don't necessarily think it'll be his last race for good, but obviously time will tell.
Yeah, indeed, and it was such a shame, really. I remember we all said once Mick had got some points in the bag, which he did with that P8 and P6, double points on the spin, if you will, that would secure his future in Formula 1 for at least next season, but that's just not transpired at all. And as you hinted at earlier, Tristan, I just don't know what Haas wanted from him to make sure he kept that seat for next year, because it's very easy to go and say, oh, go on, be Kevin Magnussen, but immediately, once Magnussen got, dare I say, that freak P5 in the first Grand Prix, there was always going to be an uphill battle for Schumacher, coupled with the regulations and the rest. As someone who admires Haas, I fear that they're going to be in exactly the same situation again next year, where Magnussen will have beaten Hülkenberg convincingly. Hülkenberg would have had a fine season around P15, 16, 17, not done too well, not done too badly, points in 1 or 2 races, and they'll go, well, that wasn't too smart, was it? What other drivers are around out there? Who can we get? Who can we look at for the future to replace Hülkenberg? Because at that point, he'll be 36 years old. You can easily go and say, oh, well, you can race to your 40. You can race to your 41. Sure, if you're Lewis Hamilton, Alonso and Raikkonen, sure, people who have won championships more than got on the podium a few times and won races, that's absolutely fine, but I just don't think that Hülkenberg is of that calibre where someone can make the argument of, oh, he's older, he's got the experience and he's still race fit, because I'm not convinced by being out of Formula 1 in the traditional sense for the length that he has been. Granted, 1 or 2 COVID substitutes, so he still is ready to go in many aspects and was for this season. I'm not convinced it's going to be a successful move or relationship for Haas moving forwards with Hülkenberg and Magnussen. I'm sure that they'll get on fine quarterly, as Gasly and Ocon will next season with Alpine, but I am scratching my head with this one, because I just cannot see what Hülkenberg brings to Haas that Schumacher was lacking.
Exactly. And actually, if you actually look at Schumacher's results across the year, I don't know whether or not it's just Haas maybe think they're better than they are. As in, they had that incredible beginning. And it's when Magnussen in his first race for Haas ended up coming home in P5 in Bahrain, scoring himself 10 points. If you remove that, by the way, remove that 10 point points advantage that Magnussen got from that first sort of freak race, then they are actually tied on points. So, let's not forget that Magnussen was a bit skewed. I mean, Mick also had an incredible race as well, when he got 8 points from coming in P6 in Austria. But the thing is, this is my kind of the point. If you actually look at his Mick's results across the year, they're pretty much in line with what you would expect. There's a smattering of points here and there. There's a couple of finishing in 11th places, a couple of 12th places, the odd 17 when things didn't really go your way, a couple of 13th place. But that's where Haas is, right? And surely if Mick's in 11th and Magnussen's in 10th, which happened, then that's about where they are. Bear in mind that you've also got the AlphaTauris, for example, the Alpines fighting also for sometimes P10 as well. You look at the way the grid's laid out, you think, well, actually, Daniel Ricciardo had a poor qualifying, so he's in a McLaren fighting for the last point. What do you think is going to happen to Mick? The McLaren is a better car. It just so happens that the other cars are out of place. And also if you compare that to someone like George Russell, right, in the Williams and his performances across from 2019 onwards, then you see kind of the same thing. I mean, mid-teens sometimes. The odd point. I mean, for George, it took him a couple of years because he was in the Williams, which, yes, admittedly is a much worse car. But when you actually compare everything across and you look at it from an expectations perspective, I think Mick did just what we'd expect. Managed to grab 12 points, come 15th. Yeah, fair enough. That's about where he is. So I'm actually quite annoyed about this one, as you can probably tell. I think they made the wrong choice.
Yeah. And we finally get on to Nicholas Latifi. He was qualifying in P20, rose to the lofty heights of P19, and someone retired. So our thoughts on Latifi. Personally, I'm not going to be missing him. He's going to be replaced by Logan Sargent, the US driver. But your thoughts firstly before I'll get my teeth into it.
Will it be his last F1 race? Yes, it will. To cut it short. Realistically, he was a nice bloke and he tried his best. And he got 2 points in Japan this year, which is great for him. And he was okay. I'm trying to find positives. Yeah, he seemed nice. His time is over, I think. Realistically, we know he was there because the money he had. He didn't do too badly in junior formally. I mean, it did take him 3 years to become a runner-up in Formula 2. But he won 6 races across those 3 years in Formula 2. But then he also got to F1, and I can't quote the exact statistic, but against George Russell and Alex Albon in his F1 career, took part in 3 seasons, about 60 races, probably lost the qualifying battle about 59-1 or something like that. It wasn't really a strong point, was it? Obviously, he was against Mr. Saturday in George Russell, but then he came up against Alex Albon and also got battered on that front this year. The fact that Nick De Vries came in one race on a Saturday morning, did one free practice session, and then after that took points in the race in a Williams, and Latifi, couldn't in the same race just got battered again. His time was up realistically, and I'm sure we'll get onto in the last bit of our podcast this week about Logan Sargent and whether that's the right choice to replace him. I think whether or not it was, Latifi's time was going to be up. 3 years is about right in terms of what he could have produced and proved. He came out at the start of the year and said that he wanted to be a team leader for Williams and that he wanted to be the man to take over the mantle after George Russell had left. Did he do that? No, he didn't, realistically. So his time was up, I think, and wish him the best of luck. Whatever his next thing will be, I reckon he'll find himself in sports cars or something like that. That's often where lots of F1 drivers who didn't quite make it, that's where they end up going. But best of luck to him to whatever he does.
Yeah. Latifi. I mean, that's a good summary of his sort of best best moments, if you like. It's quite difficult. They did a best moments of Latifi video for him, and one of the best moments is him just starting a race in F1.
And a home race as well. Let's not forget.
Home race. So look, we point and laugh, but he actually got to Formula 1, and that's something in itself. 20 of the best drivers in the world, and could he thrash me around the track? Probably, but we don't have equal cars, so who's to say? Who knows? And he did get to Q3. Let's not forget that. All the drivers made it to Q3, which is good. Well done him. But unfortunately, Latifi's job was less of team leader and more as sort of walking, talking team sponsor. And if he helped propel Williams to next year without them going bankrupt, then he has my respect for that, because I am a big fan of Williams, and I want them to keep going. Latifi did get points this year, as well, which was excellent. It was good for him to not finish his final year without no points. So he finished in P9 to get 2 points in Japan, which is a notoriously difficult track. And I think you're right. I think he was just a solid guy. Watching him and Alex Albon have fun on doing the little YouTube silly things, that was nice as well. But we're not going to miss him. Let's face it. We're not going to miss him, and I wish him every success going forward and doing something else. But for him, it just time was up, and 3 years is probably long enough. He had one go at this type of car with the new regulations, and with no success really in Williams. I mean, and it's Williams, let's face it. In the last generation of cars either. So unfortunately, as one door opens for Latifi to exit, it slams firmly closed with the appointment of, as you say, Logan Sargent. So now at least Latifi won't have the pressures of F1 anymore, and he can enjoy himself, I think, and his lots of wealth.
Absolutely. He was a good driver. He was a great driver. If you compare him to other paid drivers, I think is the best way to describe Latifi. But yes, Logan Sargent is going to be replacing him, partnering up with Alex Albon and Williams next year. In the final race of the F2 season, he finished in P4, which meant that he got the required number of super license points to be able to race in Formula 1. There were question marks over whether he would get this, and that was the great deciding factor, if you will, as to whether or not he would be in that seat or whether he wouldn't be. And it was quite funny seeing Jost Capito answering questions regarding what would happen if they didn't, or Logan Sargent didn't get those points, because it was quite clear there was no structured, coherent, written down plan. So I think everyone at Williams is quite happy and less tense than they were now versus the start of this Grand Prix weekend. And it's nice to see Youth being given a chance. He's obviously a decent young driver, did well in F2, but for anyone who's been listening to this podcast series for a number of episodes, indeed series, my litmus test for whether you should be in F1 is you've got to win F2. I think that is the logical progression. And if you look at someone like Yuki Tsunoda, going back to him, didn't win F2, had one season there, then got boosted up to Formula 1, and his number of seasons so far in the sport has been nothing more than okay. So nice to see he's been given a chance, but I think it also shows a bit of lack of ambition really from Williams as well, because if they were to have someone like Albon and, dare I say, Mick Schumacher partnering him, or someone like Ricciardo, if Schumacher wasn't available, that would be a more ambitious, we're about to go and get points type of move from Williams. But I think it's quite clear to see they're not going to be moving a lot higher than P9 in the Constructors next season, I fear. But hopefully I'm proved wrong in that regard.
Tom, do you think Alex Albon will be the team leader going into next year, or do you think because they're Albon's sort of fresh face as well that there won't really be a team leader from a driver's perspective in the team?
I think Albon has to be the team leader, really, because not only did he have more experience and more points than Latifi in prior, but now you've got to consider he's also a lot older. He's no longer the kid on the block, if you will. 26 years old, he may have a fresh face, but he's now in the peak of his power, really, when it comes to his Formula 1 career. So now he needs to sort of kick on and carry on from what he was doing last season. A decent season, dare I say, as well, for him in a Williams. He's got 3 points finishes, looking at the entirety of the 2022 calendar, P10s twice and then a P9, not to be scoffed at all in terms of finishing in this Williams car. So I think, yes, if Williams are going to do well next season, if they are going to be successful, rise to P9, dare I even say P8, it'll be, I think, more down to Albon. And that's not really me having a dig at Sargent. I think, as we see with someone like Zhou, for example, as any rookie that comes into Formula 1, they do need a season, or in some cases a season and a half or a season or 2 seasons to really bed themselves in. So they need Albon more than ever, really. But I think Sargent will be an upgrade on Latifi, owing to his racecraft, dare I say, but we'll see. And it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 39 of F1 in Review, reviewing the season finale of Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much for tuning in, be that on your preferred podcast provider, or be that via River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature. A reminder that you can follow myself, Tristan, and the F1 In Review account on Twitter. The handle for the F1 In Review account is just F1 In Review. And while the season is over, in terms of F1 In Review, in terms of what we do for this season, we're staying here for 3 more episodes. Up next will be the winners episodes, where we'll pick constructors and drivers who we think have won in some aspect. This doesn't have to be winning the championship. There are other drivers aside from Max Verstappen who can win this, but people and constructors who we think have exceeded expectations in many ways. And then from then on, there'll be 2 more episodes which I'll leave as a mystery for now, but you can tune in and we'll be done in time for Christmas, and we'll be taking then the winter break, reviewing all our predictions ahead of the next season of F1, that being 2023. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next episode.